So these kind of questions are complete the passage. So completing the passage simply means what will be the line that will be in continuation of the existing passage. Simply which line will support the given argument, given passage. First, concern about the financial well-being of elderly citizens. The government of Runagir decided 2 years ago to increase the pension by 20%. Okay, so all the people over 65 will get more than 20% pension. Inflation in the intervening period is negligible, and the increase has been duly received by all eligible Runakians. Nevertheless, many of them are no better off financially than they were before the increase because. So they are no better off financially. What does it mean? They don't have more money in their hands. So the argument here is that despite getting more pension, they're no better off financially. That means they don't have more money in their hands. Okay. So that could be because first they rely entirely on government pension for their income. And this doesn't tell me why should they not have more money. If they rely on the government income, that means they're getting more money, more pension. So this doesn't explain why they don't have more money. Again, banks are so inefficient that it can take up to 3 weeks to cash a pension check. So what this says is they'll get it, the pension will get delayed in terms of reaching the people, but still they'll get it. It doesn't explain why they don't have more money. That they buy goods whose prices tend to rise especially fast in times of inflation. The passage says the inflation is negligible. That means the prices are not more out. The pension was increased when the number of elderly Runagians below the poverty line reached an all-time high. So what it means is number of people who need pensions or who are eligible for pensions have gone up. For example, earlier there were 100 people eligible for pension. Now there are, let's say, 200 people who are eligible. So that means more people will need money. So, but it doesn't tell me why every single person who is getting the pension will have lesser money. Okay, or why they are not getting the increased money, or despite getting the increased money, they're not, they don't have more money in their hands. It doesn't explain that. It simply tells me the government has to shell out more money because there'll be more people to be, eligible for pensions. This is out. In Nagia, children typically supplement the income of elderly parents, but only by enough to provide them with a comfortable living. So what it tells me is that pension is not the only source of income. The other source of income could be their children paying them some money, supplementing some income. For example, let's say from pension, they're getting 5,000, but their total expenditure is 7,000. So their children will pay another 2,000 so that they can comfortably live their life with 7,000. Now, since the pension goes up, it becomes 6,000, so it goes up by 20%. But their expenses are 7,000 because it says the inflation is negligible. So now the children would be paying 1,000 because their total expenses are same. So now, despite getting more pension, they're getting same amount of money end of the day. So this is the argument which says that they're not getting more money. When people engage in activities that help others, their brain releases endorphins. So brain's natural opiates, which induce in people a feeling of well-being. It has been suggested that regular release of endorphins increases people's longevity. And the statistics on adults who regularly engage in volunteer work shows they live longer on average than adults who do not volunteer. However, that statistic would be what we would expect even if volunteering does not boost longevity. That means on the same people that were picked for that study, for that statistics, even if they were not volunteering, we'll get the same data. I mean, they'll still live longer than the other people. So what explains that? A says in the communities studies, women were much more likely to do regular volunteer work than men are, and women tend to live longer than men do. So what it means is, let's say normally there are 50% men and 50% women. Now if you do some study on them, let's say we'll get some data as to they live for 60 years or 70 years. Now people who do volunteer, they have women majority. For example, more than 50% of them are women. Now if women generally live longer than the men, this group that we selected, okay, this group of people which has more women compared with men will actually have longer life on an average compared with the normal population. Okay, so even if they are not doing any volunteering work, if we pick the same group that we picked here, they live longer. Okay, so a proper analogy would be, let's say the argument says people who wear skirts have longer hair. Okay, they have longer hair. Now let's say first statement says mostly women wear skirts and mostly women keep longer hair. Okay, so this is similar to this. Volunteering work makes them live longer. It says mostly women do volunteering and women live longer. Okay, so it's not the skirts which is linked to longer hair, it's the women. Okay, so it's like women live longer and women do more volunteering. So it's the woman which is linked to living longer, but because of the incidence of the two things, you might feel that people who do more volunteering live longer. So this explains that particular thing. Second statement, number of young adults who do regular volunteering work is on increase. Is on increase means, so maybe earlier they were 5% of the total people. Okay, 5% of the total volunteers were adults, and now it has become 10%. Maybe earlier it was 50% of the total volunteers being adults, now it is 70%. These will give me two different answers totally. 5% to 10% simply means that out of those people who are doing volunteering work, there's some adults, some young adults. Here it would mean majority of them are adults. Okay, so if there are just 5 to 10% of the volunteering people are young adults, so we'll not get the data as to why they are living longer. We'll not get that kind of data. But if majority of them are young adults, they might live longer. So we'll get different answers here. Feeling of well-being induced by endorphins can, at least for time, mask the symptoms of various conditions, diseases. So it actually says that volunteering might be responsible for living longer out. It's rare for a person to keep up a regular schedule of volunteer work throughout. This is kind of irrelevant. This doesn't show anything why volunteering is not linked to longer life. Some people find that keeping a commitment to do regular volunteering work becomes a source of stress. This is actually opposite. But again, this doesn't tell me why the people who are doing volunteering work might live longer without volunteering getting linked to them. Here's our answer. A recent poll found that over 80% of the residents of Namt province favor a massive expansion of the commuter rail system as a means of significantly reducing congestion on the province's highways and were willing to help pay for the expansion through more taxes. So 80% of the people who were surveyed, they support expansion of the rail system, and they are willing to pay higher taxes to support it. Nevertheless, poll results indicate that expansion of the rail system, if successfully completed, would be unlikely to achieve its goal of easing congestion. So people are voting to expand the rail system. Despite that, the congestion on the highways might not get better. Okay, it might remain same or get worse. Why? What could explain that? Most people in favor of expanding the rail system reported less congestion during their highway commute as the primary benefit they would experience. So what it means is, because rail system, more people would start using rail system than using their own cars, will have lesser congestion on the highways. Okay, and what benefit I can draw? They're reporting this as a benefit. So they'll only benefit by less congestion on the highways if they want to travel by their cars on highways. Because if they want to travel by rail, this won't be any benefit to them. The benefit they could drive is only when they, with they're using their own cars on a less congested highway. That means, because I'll see a highway to be less congested, or there could be a lot of people who'd start using their vehicles, start using their own cars, and start using highways because it's less congested. So it might turn out to be equally or more congested. Okay, so people who are otherwise not using highway because it's congested might start using highways because it's less congested, and it will add to more and more congestion. That's the right option. If you see other options, of the less than 20% residents who not counted as favoring the expansion, about half claim to have no opinion one way or other. It doesn't matter actually, because we are talking about 20% people who are not even proposing to expand the rail system. So it doesn't matter. Twice daily periods of peak congestion caused by people commuting in cars have grown from about an hour each to almost 2.5 hours. So let's say in 2000, the peak hour congestion was of 1 hour. In 2020, right now, let's say the peak hour congestion is of 2.5 hours. So now what we are concerned with is, now let's say if we make a rail system, let's say it'll take 6 months to make a rail system. The congestion after that 6 months compared with congestion in 2020 compared with congestion now, we're not even concerned what was the congestion period 20 years back. Okay, so this is completely irrelevant in that sense. What we are trying to compare is, will the congestion be 2.5 hours lesser or more? We have nothing to do what it was 20 years ago. Expanding the commuter rail system will require the construction of dozens of miles of new rail bed. So it will, new railway tracks need to be laid, but it doesn't tell me how will it affect congestion on highways or not. The proposed expansion of the commuter rail system will make it possible for some people who both live and work at suburban locations to commute by rail. So more people will use rail, it will only decongest the highways. It doesn't tell me why the congestion will not decrease. Paradox kind of questions are like, let's say X should cause Y. Okay, so if X happens, Y should happen. But he's giving a situation, let's say X happened, but Y did not. So that's a paradox. So what explains that paradox? Essentially, we are doing here is, we are trying to find one reason or one option that will weaken this relationship. Okay, for example, X is not the only reason which causes Y. It could be another reason A causes Y. Okay, that's just an example of what the right option could be. Let's see. In order to raise revenue, the federal government planned a tax amnesty program that allows tax delinquents to pay all owed tax without added financial penalty. So what the government is doing is, now if you don't pay tax, if you're tax defaulter, you need to pay tax plus some penalty when you get caught. So according to this program, this tax amnesty program, you can pay your tax without penalty. So it's giving some incentive to pay your tax. Okay, so that people feel obliged, or people feel little incentivized in paying the taxes right now. However, economists projected that federal government would collect a far lower percentage of total tax owed by delinquents than that state governments implementing similar programs. So state governments will do better compared with federal government in implementing this program. Why? Okay, so the paradox here is, why state government's program will be successful compared with federal government's program? What can explain that? Tax amnesty programs are only successful if they are widely publicized. Now, does it say that the federal government cannot publicize and state governments can publicize? No, it doesn't tell me the difference between the state and federal government programs. Most people who honestly pay their state taxes are equally honest in paying their federal tax. This again doesn't tell me the difference between their two programs or why one could be more successful. Although federal tax delinquents usually must pay high financial penalties, states require far lower financial penalties. Now, it says is, for federal government tax defaulters, the penalty is usually higher. So that means if I waive off that penalty, the incentive is much higher for them to use this program. So this actually tells me that, this actually tells me otherwise, that federal government programs would be more successful. State tax rate varies considerably from state to state, but federal tax is levied according to laws which apply to the citizens of all the states. It tells me that federal tax is same, but state government's taxes could be different. Now it doesn't tell me which tax is more or lesser. Okay, a more tax would be like a more reward for not paying tax. Okay, but no such information is given, so we don't know why state government program would be better. Unlike most federal tax delinquents, most state tax delinquents fail to pay state tax because of an oversight rather than a decision not to pay. So it tells me some difference in which state government tax defaulter are doing it because of a mistake, because of an oversight. They're not willful, but federal tax defaulters are willful defaulters. Okay, it's a decision not to pay. They're doing it willfully. What it means is, the state department's taxpayers, they were willing to pay. It's just that a mistake that they're not paying. So whenever they see any chance to avoid any penalty, they'll take it because they any which way were willing to pay. But federal tax delinquents, they are willfully not paying. So even if you give them a chance to pay, they might not take it. So this explains why state government tax program would be better. Per capita expenditure on prescription drugs rose by 15%. In order to curb these dramatic increases, the Ministry of Health prohibited drug manufacturers from raising any of their products' prices. So if you have an existing drug, the company cannot increase the price. Even the use of prescription drugs did not expand after the price freeze. That means it's not that people are taking more of drugs. Per capita expenditure drugs continued to increase. Okay, so the price is not increasing, the quantity of drugs is not increasing. Still, per capita expenditure for prescription drugs is increasing. Okay, so what would explain this paradox? First, after price increases were prohibited, drug manufacturers concentrated on producing new medicines to replace existing products. So, the passage says the price cannot be increased for the existing products. Now, what they're doing is they're coming up with new products, or they're replacing the existing product with new products, okay, whose prices are higher. Okay, for example, a tablet for headache, let's say X is the name of the tablet, it costs $1. Okay, now I cannot increase the price, but I, make this product obsolete and I come up with product Y, which I price at $2. Okay, there is no law which is stopping from launching a new drug at any price. Okay, so this could be a reason why, despite a freeze in price hike, we are still paying more for prescription drugs. Second, population of Verona rose steadily. Population doesn't count because we're talking about per capita expenditure. Improvement in manufacturing processes enabled drug manufacturers to maintain high profit levels. We're not talking about profit levels, we're talking about price. In addition to imposing a price freeze, the government encouraged doctors to prescribe generic versions instead of the more expensive. So this should actually take the expenditure down. After price increases were prohibited, some foreign manufacturers of expensive drugs ceased marketing them. That means you're not any which way promoting more expensive drugs. This would actually lead to lower prices. This doesn't explain higher prices. Cotton farms of Country Q became so productive that the market could not absorb all that they produce. Okay, consequently, cotton prices fell. So, because of oversupply, the prices fell. Government tried to boost cotton prices by offering farmers who took 25% of their cotton acreage out of production and directly support payments up to specified maximum per farm. So government is proposing they cut down their production, okay, and a government will simply transfer money into their accounts. Okay, so if they cut production, the prices the price fall will stop, the prices will actually increase and it will help the fellow farmers, right? So that's what they're doing now. Because the government is compensating by directly transferring money, there would be burden on the budgets of the government. So the question here is, the government's program, if successful, will not be a net burden in the budget. Okay, so despite giving more money, or despite giving extra money to the farmers, there won't be any net burden in the budget. What explains that? Okay, this is a paradox. So now if you try to think, if government is transferring money to, government is giving away money, now no net burden on the budget means the government should be getting some money from other sources so that it balances out. So let's see. Depressed cotton prices meant operating losses for cotton farms, and the government lost revenue from taxes on farm profits. So what it says is, because of the low prices, the farmers might be getting or might be running on losses on the farms, and the government is losing out on the taxes that they would have got had the farmers been making profits. Now, if the government successfully implements this program and the production is really cut down, the prices would actually increase, and the farmers may turn to profits. Profits means more tax for the government. Okay, so this loss because of the transfer might get compensated by more tax that the government will take. So this explains why there may not be a net burden on the budget. Second, cotton production in several countries other than Q declined slightly. So, we are not concerned what is happening in other countries. First year that the payment program was in effect, cotton acreage was 5% below its level in the base year of program. Now the government is saying if the farmers take 25% of the cotton acreage out of production. So it says overall 5% reduction happened in the acreage. Now it's overall 5%. Now it doesn't mean that every farmer is doing less than 25%. There could be some farmers, okay, who are meeting these norms of decreasing by 25%, decreasing the acreage by 25%. So still the government has to shell out. This doesn't explain it. The specified maximum per farm meant that for every large cotton farms, the support payments were less per acre for those acres. Still, it's saying that for some farmers will have to pay lesser, for other farmers will have to pay more. It doesn't tell me how the government will compensate for that money. Farmers who wish to qualify for support payments could not use the cotton acreage that was withdrawn from production to grow any other crop. So farmers are not able to use that. But still, it doesn't explain how the government will get more, extra money that will compensate for the money it shells out.